So we've talked a lot about cEDH, and we want to check our biases. We do a lot of systems analysis, and that comes from our game design background. But the reality on the ground sometimes is considerably different from what you get from a systems perspective. So we thought it's important to check our biases and invite on an expert in the cEDH space. Let's get into it.
Distraction makers.
So Logan, welcome. Why don't you tell us who you are, where you're from, what you're doing here?
My name is Logan Doan. I'm one of the founding members of CriticalEDH. We're a group of tournament grinders, cEDH tournament grinders out of Denver, Colorado. And we're also caretakers of the largest league online. So we have 475 players.
So you're fairly familiar with cEDH then?
Officially on Top Deck, I've played 47 tournaments in the past year.
Nice. Wow. I found your YouTube channel, CriticalEDH. I quickly realized that you guys were creating content that I had not really been seeing on YouTube, and it made me go yes, this is part of what I've been looking for in the cEDH scene, are people who are going to tournaments, honing their experience with each of those tournaments, and then you bringing that to YouTube and communicating that to a bigger audience, I think was something severely lacking in the scene. So to see you guys come on board, I think pretty early on, I was like, yes, you guys need more viewers. People need to know about this channel. So make sure that you're checking out CriticalEDH. And also, you mentioned, the league that just had started too.
Thank you so much. I mean, just to your point of saying that the content doesn't exist. There's tons of people that play cEDH and want to play in tournaments and stuff, but a lot of players don't know what that looks like, or how do you prepare for a tournament? What's it like to play with friends and in a tournament in a competitive setting? And I know there's a lot of that stuff for 60 card, but cEDH, it's kind of few and far between.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think for us, it's important, to check our biases about the things that we're thinking about when we're talking about Commander. We tend to evaluate things from a systems level perspective as game designers, because that's the space in which we exist in terms of writing rule sets, testing those out, seeing what kinds of incentives those give players. And the reality on the ground is that it might be, skewed. It might be different from the perspective that we're having. The video that sort of spawned this conversation was talking about the dynamic of playing to win versus playing not to lose. And this is a principle from really early on competitive 60-card Magic, where sort of the first emergent tournament decks in 60-card were on opposite ends of the spectrum. You had Sly, which eventually becomes Red Deck Wins. On the other side of it, you had what was called the Deck. That eventually becomes a hard control, effectively. And in both ends of that spectrum, the Red Deck Wins is basically saying, I want to have my deck tuned to the most efficient way to win the game possible. And in 60 card, in their view at that time, it was, how do I just have every card in my deck either be damage or the things that play the cards that are damage. And then on the opposite end, you're playing a deck that is almost all answers, and then you're playing one card that will inevitably win you the game. At the time was Sarah Angel. And so when we take that dynamic and we move it into cEDH, we think about what we call the strategy circle, which is rush, economy, and defense. And the strategy circle comes from an outside of Magic perspective. That's a resource management game perspective, where there's only so many different ways you can spend resources. So rush is, I'm spending my resources to attempt to win the game. Economy is, I'm investing my resources to get more resources. And defense is, I'm investing my resources to stop my opponent. And part of the dynamic of that video is basically saying, okay, well, all things considered, rush is actually probably at an advantage systemically in Commander, because your defense is only so good because you have 4 people you're trying to defend against.
If you look at the tip of the iceberg, it's possible to put decks into these sort of different segments of the strategy circle in cEDH, but really every deck can do rush, every deck can do defense, every deck can do economy, at least the good ones, in my opinion. There are some decks that are outliers of that, but for the most part, the decks that are performing can do these different aspects of the strategy circle in varying degrees of success. Sometimes you're presented with a hand that is like, okay, well, I have a Heuristic Study on turn 1 or turn 2, And that's just my plan because that's what's being presented to me. And like whether it's a good plan or not, I'd rather not mulligan past like 5 or 4 to present that plan. And so you get pushed in these directions by what the deck presents to you sometimes. But also, I think that, like I said, the good decks, they're able to do these different aspects or at different levels because that's what makes them good. You're able to be flexible. You're able to kind of roll with the punches and accept what comes your way or shift strategies in the middle of the game.
What was innovative in 60 card Magic at the time of when it was Sly and the deck at the time is because I think prior to that there was never really something seen as these very, very consistent archetypes with a strategy in mind going into the game, right? There had been combo decks leading up to that, but this was two very different concepts taking the same resource management game, but in these different directions, right? And the primary thing I think is why they were so successful is because they were all in on this one very particular strategy. Do you think that what we've noticed with cEDH, but Commander games in general, is that people tend to, I guess, put what would be considered your sideboard of a 60 card game into their deck, right? And it's like you're saying, it's versatile, right? You could be any of these 3 archetypes potentially, depending on how you decide to mulligan and how you decide to play that game out. Do you think that it is a hindrance of a cEDH deck if it goes all in with a particular strategy? And this feels somewhat of kind of what we were commenting on with Semi-Blue coming into the format, right? Is this something that is all in on this very specific, not one specific combo line, but a specific strategy in mind, right? Which is that I'm not going to go and interact with the other players. I'm just going to go in and try to win the game as fast as possible. Do you think that that's a good sign or a bad sign when it comes to deck archetypes, or do you think the versatility is important?
It's interesting you bring up Semi-Blue because I think some time has passed since the video in which you guys mentioned it and talked about it. We've seen very little direct impact of Semi-Blue on the format, and we haven't seen any major results of the deck, at least on the US side of things. It's interesting because a lot of these cards in our format act in multiple manners. So let's take Necropotence, for example. Resolving a Necropotence, generally speaking, if you're playing Blue Farm or Rogsai, that means you're angling for a win on probably your next turn. And in certain instances, sometimes if you draw 7 cards or 10 cards from your Necropotence on your first activation, you don't get the pieces that you need to win the game. You might discard cards that don't get you there, and you might keep a bunch of interaction. In that case, it's a defensive card. So these flexible cards are extremely highly valued for just being generically good. But just to go back to like Semi-Blue, we've seen not direct influence from that deck, but I would say indirect influence.
Yeah, let me just hop in real quick about what we see as the zoomed out strategy of Semi-Blue. The thing that got us so excited about it and why we made the video, honestly, it's not about the deck in particular. It's about the idea of giving up something in the strategy circle to get a higher advantage somewhere else. And like to hear you talk about Tim Necrom and these things in this way of like, well, they can move into any sort of piece on the strategy circle that they need to, and they have that versatility in that way. And so you as a pilot can know, okay, well, I should be investing in my economy right now, or I should be attempting to win the game right now because my window is here. And when we look at like, this is why the dynamic between Red Deck Wins and the deck is so interesting, is because those two strategies are saying, well, I'm not going to try to do everything. I'm going to try to do one thing the best way I can possibly do it. And so when we look at Semi-Blue, the thing that I'm seeing from them is I'm trading my ability to interact with my opponents for more consistent and resilient win conditions. And I do think that a lot of decks put cards in their deck that do that, right? Like Grand Abolisher, or the other sort of silence effects, basically. And instead of having those cards, you have that stapled to your win conditions in semi-blue. You're saying, I'm playing Last March of the Ents, which is uncounterable, or I'm using Delighted Halfling to cast my creatures, then they can't be, they're legendary, so they can't be countered. Or I'm playing a spell that is actually multiple spells because it has Storm or it has Cascade. And I think in addition to that, you're also not playing that interaction, because if you cascade into a counterspell, it's really bad. So again, the thing that got us so interested in that particular strategy was not necessarily the deck itself, but it was the idea of, I am more consistently going to be able to do my specific game plan rather than being able to do a lot of different game plans and then accidentally draw the wrong part of my deck at the wrong time.
Well, I think that your point about semi-blue being very focused is important, and that is certainly a way you can look at that deck. Another way you could look at that deck is that it lacks tutors to specifically get out its win cons. Sure, it can do lots of uncounterable things, but those uncounterable things are often very expensive mana-wise. They don't inherently win you the game. They kind of get you to a winning position, but sometimes when you get to that winning position, somebody else is already putting a win attempt on the stack. And we've seen this many times in tournaments where it's like, oh, if I just had another turn, I win the game.
Oh yeah, no,
it's like,
yeah,
well,
that's
yeah,
classic.
You're playing CEDH.
That's classic
Yeah,
in 60
that's
card
like-
too. Yeah.
Sure. So I think that, yes, these decks do something very powerful, and there's no disputing that. But it's somewhat, even though it's more focused at doing one specific thing, it's also almost less consistent because of it. It sounds very counterintuitive, but when you're cascading, what are you cascading into? Well, it's not a counterspell, but does it combo with your A plus, B plus C that's on the board or in your hand? Or it's sort of harder to maneuver. And you're right, it does lack these other elements of politicking and things like that. But it's just interesting. Like I said, the deck has had lots of effects on our meta, but I don't see it winning a whole lot of tournaments at the moment.
So I think we're looking at it less from like what the specific deck is doing, right? That specific version of semi-blue, what we're currently seeing is semi-blue, and more so from a philosophical standpoint, what a deck like that could do to the format. Because it's like you said, is that it's less consistent because it can't be versatile, right? But it is more consistent on its specific game plan, right? Because it's like you said, someone could put a win attempt on the stack before that person had an opportunity to play their uncounterable win attempt. But it's like, what's that specific permutation of that game, right? What seat position were they in? What were the other players doing? Like, what did they mulligan? And so like, there's so many of these very, very little tiny things that can change the outcome of that I think it'd be really difficult for us to see how any one deck would perform, a deck philosophy would perform when compared to so many other decks, especially if most people are still considering, well, yeah, Blue Farm still at the top, still number one deck. I'm going to go and play Blue Farm because that's been the
number
thing.
one deck.
That's been the thing that
Sure.
wins. Yeah.
You're making a good point about the philosophy of the deck. And I think the point that I was trying to get across, and I didn't quite get to yet, was that even though I'm playing Blue Farm, and it is the best deck in the format, at least if you look at the stats and what the top players will tell you, I'm actually playing in a manner that I'm being influenced by the play patterns of semi-blue, because I'm cutting what most people see as staples from the deck. And whether it's correct or not, I don't know. I'm still testing. I'm still like trying to figure out what that looks like. But what I can tell you is that I have a winning record with it. I've been winning my local tournaments. I've been winning games online in our league, and the deck is feeling good because I'm cutting things like staples like Mindbreak Trap and Ranger Captain. And I'm just trying to play more proactively because there's really not a whole lot of punishment for just trying to put more win attempts on the stack right now. And I think that's something that a mark that semi-blue is leaving on our format, whether the deck itself is being successful or not.
So one thing that we've, I guess, sort of been critical about with Commander generally is, and this is like a pretty well-documented phenomenon with free-for-all games, is that free-for-all games with a lot of direct interaction have sort of this issue where the politics game ends up overriding a lot of the actual systems of the game itself. In that, and I think the best way we've been able to sort of articulate this is that Is it more important that you know who the threat is, or that you can convince other people that you're not the threat? And so I'm wondering, from your perspective, in the tournament scene, how have you seen that manifest? And do a lot of matches come down to that dynamic?
This is an aspect of CEDH that is hard for newer players to grasp, where players can talk and convince each other out of doing certain things, or convince each other to do certain things. Like, don't kill my Orcish Bowmaster right now, because if we have two, we can actively control the board and work together to keep the two Rogthrast players down. And like, both of us can benefit from each other having Bowmasters. When it comes time, we'll both just kill each other's Bowmasters, and we won't have any Bowmasters. Things like that. And players hate this. A lot of players hate this. Some players like it, and for me, it's just a normal part of the game. It's part of tournament play, and navigating those tough situations, it's definitely hard if you're not experienced with it.
We refer to that as just the politics game, right? Because the politics game transcends Commander, right? It's free for all games with direct interaction. And the politics game has its own set of skills, its own set of heuristics. And so you see and hear a lot of the same conversations happen at a game of Commander as you do with, I just played a game called Moonrakers the other day, or when we play Munchkin or Dungeon Mayhem, or, insert, any free for all game.
That has direct interaction.
And so when you're giving those examples of those conversations that you're having, like, that in itself is a skill, right? That people have to sort of flex, and some people are much better at it than others. Do you feel that between understanding the current meta and the combo lines and how to pilot your deck, as opposed to acquiring the skill of politics and understanding the politics game, where would you put that sort of skill differentiation between players?
It's a hard question to answer, because I think that if you're a good player, you can ideally do all of these things well. And that's what makes you be an excellent cEDH player. But you can be successful with specializing in one of these aspects or many of these aspects. And if you're not good at politicking, that's okay. You're still going to win a lot of games, because you might be good at technically sequencing your line, or just knowing what card to tutor for at the right time, and just playing your game. So yeah, politicking is an important aspect in a lot of ways. And there's players that are excellent politickers and they're not very good technically. I think I was pretty strong out of the gate with politics, because I'm a pretty social person. I like to talk, and I love to convince people to make bad deals and all kinds of stuff. I love doing that. But as I played more cEDH, I've brought up my technical skill to sort of match my politicking level. And I think that's why I'm starting to really push the boundaries of what I can do as a player.
Another aspect of the politics game is that because it's a separate game in a sense, right? It transcends into outside of the game as well. So do you feel that any sort of politicking outside of the game itself has an effect on players' chances to win? That would be like if someone at a tournament is perceived as being a liar or a cheater, or whether they're known as a really good player or a bad player, etc. Like, do you think that has an impact on how people enter into games and treat different players?
Without question, it definitely does. There's players who are infamous liars, and you have to, maybe you don't know this sitting down, but someone across from you will go, hey, this person lies a lot. Like, just be careful. And that person could be lying about that player.
Yeah, that's one thing we were going to bring up after this. Yeah.
Yeah.
And also, like, as a content creator, I'm not a big content creator, and at CriticalEDH, we're not like a massive channel, but in cEDH, people know who we are. And a lot of times I sit down at the table and they're like, oh, I just want to beat Logan, or I want to beat Jason. And I don't know that going into it, but they get so like laser focused on beating me that they're not like winning their own game. And there's so many different aspects of outside of the game and social things that influence how the game takes place, where I don't think we probably see that as much in 60 card, because what are you like? What?
Yeah, you're gonna try to convince somebody not to counter your spell in 60 card. They're like, "Nah, man,
no, please don't." And they're like, "Dude,
it's only that spell. That's all I got." Yeah.
So, do you feel that your reputation and reputation of other people that are either content creators or maybe previously known as good players puts you at a significant disadvantage when entering into tournaments?
Sometimes, yes. Sometimes it puts me at an advantage, because people want to either impress me or they want to be nicer than they normally are. It's weird, and as a creator, I feel like I have a responsibility to try not to take advantage of those situations as best I can. There's these factors that are outside of the game that will influence that in various ways, but a lot of times, like, if you're trying to resolve a grand abolish, all of that kind of fades into the background, right? Like, you're trying to win the game, and all of a sudden, like, the politics stop mattering as much.
Okay, so let's move into maybe a few questions that might be a little uncomfortable.
Okay, I'm down.
There's sort of been this recent, I guess, emergence of players discussing lying in the format. And we've heard some sort of outspoken content creators come out and say that, like, they're not going to cover people's decks who they perceive as liars, or they're going to, basically just try to really disincentivize that behavior. There's a phenomena that happens in sort of the politics game, which is that the more that you create a boogeyman out of something, the more that it can be used against people. So if, we see sort of this emergence of lying and this massive reaction towards, okay, well, liars are bad. No one wants to be a liar. If you're a liar, then you're sort of cast out from being involved in the politics game at the table potentially, and that can be not only a negative impact for you, but a negative impact on the other players potentially. And the flip side of that is that lying might actually help you win the game. So how do you feel currently about the sort of lying situation in terms of, do you think that there's an incentive to lie to win the game? And do you also think that there's an incentive to call other people liars?
I personally don't like calling people out directly for lying. And if you lie to me in a game, then it's probably my fault that I put myself in a position to be lied to. Has it happened to me before? Absolutely. Have I lied to other players? Well, not in a direct manner, right? But like you can kind of lie through a mission. You can kind of say like, well, that's not exactly what I said when I said that, right? You can phrase your words in a certain manner to mean not exactly what you say. But is it something that's going to happen forever? Yeah, absolutely. It's just it's not good for the format overall, because the whole point is to politic and make deals, and at some point you kind of expect players to hold up their end of the deal. But what I've tried to do, especially with these conversations that have been happening about lying, is make my deals smaller, make them matter less. I'm not making deals over the big things that, like, well, I need you to not win on your next turn. But overall, I don't think that lying is like a good thing for our format, and it should be discouraged. But yeah, you're right. If you call more attention to it, people are going to do it more.
If we're looking at it from not the cEDH standpoint, but from the sort of systems of what the politics game entails, right? Lying is a huge part of it, right? And you look at any other game that really encourages politics game, the people that can lie the best or need to lie and can lie the best are usually the people that will have an outsized advantage to everybody else. And so you're saying that you feel like it shouldn't be encouraged, but do you feel like if you aren't at least contributing, or you're not able to lie and lie effectively, that you then are just at a significant disadvantage to the people that do or are able to do that?
I think it adds a certain number of percentage points to your EV for a game or a tournament, right? If you're able to slyly lie and say, well, I don't have that card in my hand, but you do, sure. But like, I would find myself not making those statements in the first place. I would not make statements about what I do and don't have in my hand. I try not to, like I said, try not to put myself in those positions. But I think what you'll find is, especially if you're trying to make a name for yourself as a player, it's pretty bad overall over time to be known as a liar, because people will not take you up on deals. They won't trust you. They will just counter anything you put on the stack. Even if it's just a Ristic Study or Mystic Remora, they'll misstep your Remora and go, why should I give you anything? Because like, I know you're just going to lie to me. You're going to have more resources to lie to me. And I don't think it's a good look, especially if you're trying to become one of the top players. You don't want to be known as a disingenuous player.
This sort of butts up against our next sort of uncomfortable topic, which is collusion. And if we're imagining sort of the ratcheting of the lying meta, which is that if liars are pointed out as bad actors or whatever and not accepted in the format, then it becomes advantageous to convince others that people are liars, whether they are or not. And you end up in this situation where you can only trust the people that you personally know. And so you have an incentive to basically assume everyone is a liar unless you know that they're not, like they have a reason to not lie to you. And the flip side of this too, with the lying dynamic at play, is that arriving at a tournament with more people that you know you can trust because they're part of your team or that you know them personally or whatever it is, gives you an advantage in that meta because you're able to trust more players to make these deals. You're able versus a new player who is coming in by themselves that nobody knows, and nobody knows whether they're a liar or not, and must just assume that they would lie. In relation to 60 card here, right? Because so 60 card players who have teams perform substantially better. And it's not necessarily because they're helping each other out in the tournament where like they get paired up against each other and somebody will concede so the other person can win, which does happen, just to be clear, but it's that they can prepare together to go to this tournament. But Commander has a much different dynamic, which is you're sitting at a table with 4 other players, and if one of those players is your teammate, there's an incentive for them to help you out just because they know who you are versus the other 2 players.
This, if it were to come up, would probably come up in top 16 or top 4. Because if you're in top 16, that means you've already made the top cut. And let's say I'm paired with a teammate in the same pod for top 16, but only one of us is going to move on into top 4. And in that case, if it's not one of the other 2, then you would externally think, oh, you have an incentive to get the other player, because like if I can't get there, then maybe he should get there. That is a tough situation, but at least from my perspective, I'm so competitive that I don't want to lose to my teammates. I don't want to. It doesn't matter. Like I want to win the game. That's all I'm focused on. Is I need to win. And collusion does happen, but I just don't think it happens as much as people think. Usually, collusion happens with players trying to force draws. And 3 players will work together to try to draw a game because they know they can't win.
Oh yeah, hold on. Let me jump in. Let me jump in real quick. So I think there's a conflation that's happening between I guess what I would say 2 different, like cooperation and collusion, right? Collusion is happening outside of the game itself, where the dynamic of we're going to team up as 3 players in a game with no prior planning or anything. We're just going to team up in this specific moment because it's advantageous to the 3 of us. I don't really consider that collusion. What I consider collusion is what I described earlier, which is I'm arriving to a tournament, and I think something that you nodded to is that if you show up with enough players at a tournament and then you end up in top 16 together, the 2 people in that top 16 pod have a higher win percentage chance because they're helping each other to be the 2 that are winning versus the 2 other people that don't know each other at all, right? That's the collusion dynamic that sort of we talk about.
It's not conversations that I've had with my team because we just, I don't know. I think
why not? You'd win more games.
I'm just kidding. Yeah, but winning more games is not more important than what I would call like the sanctity of the format.
Yeah.
At least not to me, not to us. I mean, it's a hard conversation to have. It's not a comfortable one. I mean, you even couched it as that, right? It's like not something we want to talk about.
I'm wondering about a situation where you're in Swiss and both of you are on a win-in, but you're in a pod together. I think you're incentivized in that position to try to ensure that one of the 2 of you gets into top 16.
Yeah, I could see that for sure. I don't think I've personally been in that situation, but I don't know what I would do. And I don't know that it would be wrong to necessarily try to push the other person in. I guess I really haven't thought about that a whole lot.
When we talk about this, it's more so looking at this is a format in its infancy, right? Not Commander, but cEDH in particular. And it's grown significantly over the last few years. And I think as it's grown more seriously, right, there's been a lot of tournaments that have tried organizing and finding these ways of avoiding these possibilities of collusion and of outside influence, right? we really, the closest game that we can look at is poker, that has gone so far out of its way to try and avoid collusion that players cannot talk to each other basically at all. You can talk about very little.
Very little. You can't criticize gameplay. You can't give people suggestions. I don't even think you can talk about the cards in your hand.
You can't talk about cards in your hand.
Yeah. There's really tight restrictions on what you're able to talk about in poker, and it's because of this collusion scenario.
Right.
So
Collusion definitely happens. How often it happens? It's hard to say, because I think as we get into these bigger tournaments, the likelihood that you're paired up with someone exactly that you've had a conversation before, because you can't have this conversation at the table. You would have to have the conversation beforehand, right? You would immediately get a judge called on you and say like, hey, these players are openly colluding, and like that's not allowed. But the chances that you would be in a win and in pod with another person in a 200 player tournament is fairly low. So I don't think it happens as much as people say.
So touching on kind of what you were talking about there, just wanted to kind of move into like the future of cEDH, right, as a format. So like you said, the format has its problems. What do you currently see as the format's biggest challenges and potential problems for it to be seen as a sort of generally accepted competitive format amongst the community?
One of the problems we're facing right now is turn order disparity, and I don't think that there's a really good solution for that. That's one of the hidden things that we're trying to do with the league is extract data from it, because last month we had 2,500 games
that's
played.
An insane number of games.
Great.
Yeah.
Right, but that's a lot of data,
Yes.
right? So I have seat order data and like win rate data for that entire month. So
can you share it, or are you keeping that under wraps? It's fine if you're keeping it
I
under
can't share anything yet because we're still working on it. But like we will publicly share any data that we put together because we're interested in making the format better however we can.
Yeah, I mean, is there anything kind of wrap up here in terms of like what you would want to say to somebody who's sort of skeptical of the format, or a casual player that's, maybe on the fence of trying it out?
If you like playing with powerful cards, whether it's combos or big beaters or whatever, like believe it or not, there's cEDH decks that do that too. We talked about semi-blue today. I mean, you can play huge creatures and like Galta and Maelstrom Wanderer and Apex Devastator and all that fun stuff too. There's room for lots of different things in the format, and it's really fun. I think that one of the things that cEDH opened up for me was feeling comfortable winning the game and feeling like prideful that I win the game. Because in casual, it was always like, oh, you're trying to win like right now? Like I want to play another turn. And then the game turns into like 3.5 hours of us sitting around and like playing land go or like land pass or whatever. And I'm like, we need to do something. Like the game needs to progress. And sure, cEDH games can be hard and they can evolve into stack wars and stuff. But if you look at it, you're like, holy crap, like there's 80 cards on the stack and it's turn 4. Like that's not an experience you can get anywhere else.
Well, we really appreciate you coming on, Logan.
Yeah,
it's been a great conversation. It's been a long conversation.
I know.
I was like, yeah, this will be like a 20-minute-er. It's like what, hour and a half or something.
Yeah, you sent me that. I was like,
yeah,
okay.
You said it was going to be 20 minutes.
Well, no, I just said like we're going to try to cut it down to 20 minutes.
I looked at the list and I was like, that's at
Good luck
least
with
2
that.
pages on a Google Doc, so that's not a 20-minute call.
All right. Well, thanks for sticking with us here, Logan, and plenty more to talk about. So I'm sure we'll have you on again. If you want to plug anything else,
great. Anytime you need me.
Yeah, awesome. Appreciate it so much. Feel free to shout anything out else that you need to. And
yeah, so just check out our channel. It's CriticalEDH. If you want to play cEDH online, the place to play it is our league. It takes place every month. And then last but not least, we just started adnos.gg. It's a really small forum, really focused on cEDH. It's everything from the meta to artists and artist proofs and bling and all the cool stuff about cEDH.
Well, yeah, we really appreciate you coming on, Logan. Thanks so much for sharing your expertise.
Thanks so much for having me.
If you enjoyed listening to us interview Logan from CriticalEDH, please feel free to give us a like and a subscribe, maybe a comment down below.
Also, make sure to check out Logan's channel, CriticalEDH. You can find all the links in the description below. You can also join our Discord. The link is in the description. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.